Hello, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Citizens Are Not Slaves. I'm your host, David McFarlane. I named this channel Citizens Are Not Slaves because I kind of want it to be a philosophical channel about how government should be and how, what's the limit of authority of government? What is it? What rights do citizens actually have? And I'm hoping that I am live streaming now. We're going to make sure that we're live streaming before I start rattling things off, because otherwise, what's the point? And it doesn't look like I am. Let me go back to the... It says I am. It says I'm live streaming, right? So let's go to the studio and let's take a look. This is kind of annoying. I've done several live streams that never went out. And it's kind of, you got to make sure that that's actually happening. Latest video performance... videos. Is there a channel? Is there a way to go to the channel? Looking at the live. Oh, here we are. It is live. It is now registering. Okay, good. All right. So we're probably okay with this. I'm just going to click on it. Customize details. Law. Let's just do that. Save. All right, guys. Hey, just bear with me 1 second. The whole maybe one person that's watching at the moment. Actually, it's probably me, but it's being recorded for posterity. So, no, it's not made for kids, and I have to do that. I think that they made the changes, so I'll do this stuff ahead of time now, and now I can save it. All right, so channel videos. All right, and now we're off to the races. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this concept of substantive due process, right? Because what it seems like is that the county knows they don't have the authority to directly order people to wear masks. So what they've done is they've ordered businesses to not let people in unless they're wearing masks. Now, in my personal situation, I don't have a mask, and I've ordered two. I am really upset about that. I'm very upset about the order, and I'm very upset about having to buy masks, but they're not even going to be here for a week or so, and then I need to buy toilet paper probably in the next 2 days. So I'm going to go to the store, and I'm going to try to walk in, and I have a feeling that they're going to try to deny me access based on this. I'm going to make them call the cops, because if you're going to deny me just the simple access of walking into the store and buying toilet paper before, without purchasing some item that I can't even get, I don't even know where to get those, I'm going to have a big problem with that. So how do we get here? How do we get to the point where politicians think that this is a good idea? This is the worst idea I think I've heard at the county level, at least here, since Sheriff Galtieri said people shouldn't be able to carry weapons. But that's a totally different thing. The sheriff, who's a Republican, came out against the right to bear arms in this county. That was one of the things that really upset me too. But there is something that I want to talk about called the necessity conjecture, right? And now I don't know if that's what everybody else calls it. I've named it that because I kind of came up with this concept. I kind of have been watching politics for my entire life. I've been interested in politics for some reason since I was a very little kid, right? And so I've been watching this, and it seems that there are some politicians, most politicians actually, believe that if they think something's really necessary, that it means they can do it. Doesn't matter if it's directly against the Constitution, doesn't matter if it's directly against the law or a violation of the rights of citizens. If they think it's necessary, then they must be able to do it. And this is, most people are familiar with this, like starving people. Is it okay for them to steal food, right? So if you're starving and the only way that you have to get food at that moment is to steal it, Is that acceptable? Well, it's not legal. We know that. It's not legal. It's morally less reprehensible than, say, bank robbery, where you murder somebody. But at the same time, it's not legal. We know it's not legal. And I want to specifically concentrate on the law. Is it lawful? So if a politician says, I need to violate the rights of people, like, say, Bloomberg in New York, when he decided that he was going to specifically stop and frisk people, and then he was going to do that in minority neighborhoods, like target minority neighborhoods. That's what he admitted to on video. And he actually, not just admitted to, right? Like, he said that is the strategy that we should be using. And he said that. And he backed it up. He tried to, make his argument for that. So he thought that that was necessary and therefore it must be acceptable, right? Forget the Constitution. Forget the fact that it's definitely illegal. It's definitely a violation of our laws. Because he thought it was necessary, he just went ahead and did it. People would also be kind of familiar with the concept of, is it okay to steal medicine? All right, and there's a lot of people who've, especially in our, our system, our medical non-system where medicine has gone through the roof and everybody needs medical help and the prices have gone outrageous. Is it okay to steal that? And, the truth is it's not legal to steal it, right? But at the same time, I could make the other side of that argument as far as hospitals having violated the 1890 Sherman Act and basically gone non-competitive. There's a real problem if you're asking somebody to sign a blank check when they walk into the emergency room, and they're like, well, listen, you need to sign this blank check or else we can't help you. We'll just let you die. And they don't, but they kind of don't help you until you sign that blank check. And the thing is, the Supreme Court had previously ruled that was okay as long as the prices were being held down by the free market. So every other time you go to the hospital, the prices have to be covered by the free market. They've broken that. That's definitely not happening. But that's kind of off topic. So then we get to the idea of, is it okay to force people to wear masks? And I think this is, we really want to focus on the mechanism here that they're using to force people to wear masks. And that is, they're having businesses that have necessary goods and services that they provide that you need. In fact, they've even identified these businesses as essential, right? Because they've shut down all non-essential businesses. Like bars are not allowed to be open at all, period. They've said, hey, these businesses are absolutely essential. They sell things that you need and can't live without. Oh, by the way, now they're going to make you wear a mask to go inside. We can't make you wear a mask ourselves. We can't directly force you to wear masks. But what we're going to do is we're going to force the business to force you to wear a mask. Now, what they're trying to do is basically utilize the power of the business, right? The business could mandate this. I mean, if Publix or Walmart decided they wanted to make everybody wear a mask, and if you didn't wear a mask, you couldn't come in, that's handled by competition, right? Because I can go to the other store and say, I don't want to wear your mask, and then go there, and that's fine. But when the county mandates this from every store countywide, now all of a sudden, I literally cannot obtain toilet paper in this case without kowtowing to their demand for me to wear a mask, which they are not technically allowed to give me directly. So they've gone through this other mechanism. Now, what that means is that this is actually a violation of our substantive due process rights. I talked about this a second ago. I'm not sure if I got it on this live stream or if it was on the previous live stream that wasn't actually running. But substantive due process is this idea that if a cop can't get a warrant to search your home, but then he finds somebody who's willing to break in, and then he wants to get a warrant to investigate the break-in, and he can say, well, we know that Dan over here broke into the home. We asked him to, so he did it, and he's here to testify that he broke in, so now we want to get a warrant to investigate the break-in. That's a violation of your substantive due process rights, right? Because they can't get the warrant, so they do something skeezy to try to create a situation where they can get a warrant. Now, that's really what they're so it's they can't exercise their authority as an executive branch, and then they do something skeezy that tries to set up a situation where they can use their authority. So you can't arrest me for wearing a mask, But if you tell the business that I can't go buy toilet paper without wearing a mask, and then I have to go buy toilet paper and I don't have a mask, now all of a sudden you think you can arrest me for that. And that is what the cops are going to think. And that's what I kind of expect this to play out like that. But it is a violation of our rights. Now, it's not just this substantive due process concept that they're violating. It's the very concept of freedom, right? I have the ability to direct my own life, to make decisions and act in a manner that is free. Now, we have called ourselves the land of the free and the home of the brave for as long as we've existed, I think, and at least very shortly after we started to exist. And the idea that we would say, okay, you know what? This freedom thing had a good run. We're going to go ahead and just toss that out the window. That's not acceptable, right? The Constitution is designed to ensure liberty, right? That is the entire purpose of government, is to ensure liberty. So you can't just say, hey, we think it's too dangerous right now. You know what? Let me put it this way. The world is a dangerous place. It is absolutely a dangerous place. One of my favorite TV shows, Stargate SG-1, they had this episode where Major Carter, and she might have been Lieutenant Commander Carter at that point, was transferred or transported into a parallel dimension where they had basically developed a police state, and the general had become president, and the existence of the Stargate program and the alien threat had been revealed. And she made a great speech at the end where she pointed out that there's always a danger. There's always a danger. The point of government is not to scare us with how much danger there is in the world in order to take our rights away. It is to defend our liberty and make sure that we stay free in a dangerous world. It is inappropriate to say, we've had a good run, let's abdicate liberty now. It is inappropriate to say that the world is too dangerous for us to maintain liberty, because that is your entire purpose. And that is what the Constitution is written to focus on, right? The focus of the Constitution is the maintenance of liberty of the people. So they've decided that there is this great fear. And here's the other thing, right? We've had this around for like 6 months, and the official numbers are 125,000. Now, we could argue about those official numbers all day long. I definitely do. But let's just take them at their face value for a second. There are 500,000 deaths every year to cigarettes. The other day, I actually saw a kid take his mask off to smoke a cigarette. What sense does that make? You think this is a huge danger, and you're like taking your mask off so that you can introduce both that danger and another actually greater danger. It's about 4 times as large. And, well, okay, probably 2 times as large, because we've only been experiencing COVID for half a year, and the 500,000 is a full year. So let's say it's twice as dangerous. Smoking is twice as dangerous as COVID. Now, unfortunately, you don't have a decision not to have some exposure to COVID, right? Because it's a communicable disease. And if you know anything about communicability, the R naught of this disease is somewhere between 2 and 4, right? It's a huge, margin of error for an R naught. But you know what? We just don't know so much about this at the moment, so it's not that big a deal. Anyway, the point is, the R naught is so high on this disease that there is absolutely no way that any methods, any precautions will actually be effective against this. That's what people don't get, right? So, like, I studied epidemiology. I did a little self-study of epidemiology back in 2008. 2009, really, probably. And so when I was doing that, I learned a lot of the equations and the math and stuff like that. In some of the videos you may have seen, I don't know if you've ever seen my video on the other channel, which is Trendy Insurrection. I talk a little bit about the math there and how nothing we're doing is really going to stop this. We can, they said they wanted to flatten the curve, and now this flatten the curve concept has really morphed into a bait and switch. So they said, oh, we're going to flatten the curve. Everybody kind of went along with that for like a little bit. And now we're at 6 months, and they said, okay, we're gonna stop and we're going to open up. And then immediately there was an uptick in cases. Now, I believe that's actually due to increased testing at this point, not necessarily increased communicability. So but deaths have remained flat. That's a very important point. So, and I guess that's really, if you see that deaths are remaining flat, but that cases are going up, then probably if those two things diverge from each other, because in the real world, the number of cases and the number of deaths are going to be correlated, right? So if you see them diverge in data, that means that one of those data points is getting skewed somehow. And that is what that means when the cases are going up, but the deaths are remaining flat, right? It's telling us that something is happening in the way that we measure either. So it's probably going to be in the thing that's changing, the thing that's altering. So if you get a delta in one of those, more likely than not, your weirdness is going to be in that particular statistic. So it seems like there's something going on with the way we're measuring cases that somehow we've gotten to this point. I've heard some things that are kind of anecdotal and one or two one-off situations. These things can indicate that there's some kind of underlying problem. It may just be that more people have it than we realized. It could just be that it's not nearly as deadly as people think. In fact, we know that it's not nearly as deadly as people think, because the original models were that 3 million people were going to die, and that is literally, that's the worst math that you could probably do. It's like, oh, here's the fatality rate we think it has. It's like 3%, or 1% or whatever. And there's 350 million people in the United States. So, oh, look at that. 3 million people are going to die because everyone's going to get it. So, and then 1% of those people are going to die. So that means 3 million people. It was the absolute most ridiculous math. It was worst case scenario kind of math. It's what you do to get the upper limit, not what you do to model what's actually going to happen. So they modeled the upper limit as the baseline, which is crazy stupid. But I think that you know what? It's part of our narrative. They think they're the scientists that nobody listens to, right? How many movies have you seen where some scientist is screaming that a meteorite or an asteroid is going to hit the Earth, or a volcano is going to erupt, or a super volcano is going to erupt, or some, major catastrophe is going to happen, and nobody listens to the scientists, and then it happens? Well, those are narratives that we have, and those are definitely skewed towards the false positive, right? Because in real life, most scientists are full of crap. So they can make predictions all day long, and they're going to be wrong. Just think about things that we actually know more about, like, for instance, politics, right? The 2016, everybody knew for a fact that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and then she didn't, right? That is actually scientific analysis that they're doing on statistics that they gather from people. So something about their statistics was incredibly skewed, and they had no idea why. And they still don't know why, right? And now, 4 years later, they're telling us that, Trump, oh my goodness, it looks like he's losing again. Oh my goodness, he's down by so many points, right? All right, I've heard this. We've done this dance. You're probably going to be wrong again, and I'm expecting Trump will win. I don't know it'll be a landslide victory or anything like that, but I mean, especially if things continue the way that they are and the unrest that we have continues, then I think it's pretty safe to say that Trump is going to win. So, but getting back to that, the narratives, right? What's the main narrative? What's the first narrative that you remember where the scientists said something was going to happen and then it did and it was catastrophic? The story of Superman, right? So Krypton, they knew it was going to explode, but they wouldn't tell the people. But one scientist knew, and he built a rocket ship to save his kid, to send him to a faraway planet with a yellow sun where he'd have superpowers. This is like the ultimate scientists were right and you didn't listen narrative, right? So we've got that all over the place. And narratives are one way that the media lies to us, right? So they build a narrative. This is actually a kind of a great point. Have you ever heard them call a politician a Robin Hood? They especially like to say, oh, he's like Robin Hood about socialists, right? Like if Bernie Sanders wants to tax the rich and give, do some kind of program that gives money to the poor. He's a Robin Hood. But actually, Robin Hood stole money from the government and gave it to the people who were excessively taxed. Think about that for a second. They're stealing what would really be a conservative narrative about taking money from the sheriff of Nottingham, who was overtaxing people and then throwing them in jail when they couldn't pay tax, and then giving them the money so that they could pay the tax and get people out of jail and stuff like that. That is the narrative. The real narrative is that the politicians they're calling Robin Hood would be better called sheriffs of Nottingham. So, that is how we're being lied to. Like, our entire media is set up to feed us these narratives that are completely false. They're wrong. They're telling us the wrong things, and they're telling it to us as a story. So we can't really check the facts, right? Like, if you tell me the story of Robin Hood, I can't go check those facts. And then you say, oh, well, this guy is like Robin Hood. And in my mind, I go, oh, well, I guess he kind of is. Until I realize that you're full of crap and he's not at all like Robin Hood. He's the sheriff of Nottingham. So you've misidentified the characters in the narrative, but, the narrative's still there. So, yeah, that's I guess where I'm going. I'm gonna kind of give you where I'm at on this. I'm not really a Republican or a Democrat, but when I watch the Transformers, I root for the Autobots, right? And at this point, I can't look at the Democrats and say anything good about them. I generally vote Republican, and that is, I'm pro-life, right? So there's definitely a reason there. I don't particularly, I'm not happy with the Republicans, right? Like Trump, I want him to be stronger president. I want him to do, what he's trying to do, I want him to succeed. I want him to actually, the fact is, he tried to open the country up. He tried to say, okay, listen, we can't have the lockdown anymore. The lockdown has been disastrous. It has been absolutely the worst thing that's ever happened to us. He tried to open us up before these BLM protests/riots. There's definitely protests, and there are also definitely riots happening in this whole situation, right? So he tried to open us back up before this happened. And I have kind of a theory about civil unrest, right? And the idea is that it's kind of like a fire. You need fuel, you need oxygen, and you need a spark. Well, in this case, the fuel is provided by all of the people, all of the bodies that are unemployed and have nothing better to do with their day but protest/riot. And then the oxygen is the environmental factor, right? The injustice that we really do see in the system. And then and the degree to which it exists, that is something that we build up in our mind sometimes, and sometimes it's real. So, like, I know, for instance, I have not ever been beaten by the police, and I'm still not a big fan. It's like, I see what they do to people, and I don't particularly care for it, and I wouldn't want to have them come do that to me. So, generally speaking, I look at that and go, no, these people have rights. They should have rights. George Floyd, for instance, had rights. And one of the problems that we saw is that the police officer doing the arrest didn't really seem to care about the rights of the person whose rights he was violating. And that's really kind of important. It almost feels like the government thinks that the government gets to decide if we have rights or not. And that'll go back to this county case, right, where the county has decided that I can't buy toilet paper without a mask that I don't have, which means I can't buy toilet paper. They don't seem to understand that I have a right. I have a right, absolutely. I don't think anyone would argue that you have a right to access toilet paper as an American, as a human being in the United States. You have a right to access toilet paper. We even force prisons to give it to criminals, right? We don't say, like, oh, you're a criminal, you don't get toilet paper. That is one of the most basic rights that we have, to have access to, basic hygiene utility supplies. Let's say supplies. It's one of our most basic rights. Like, obviously, you would think of most basic rights as like freedom of speech, freedom to breathe, freedom of religion, things like that. But this is, wiping your butt is pretty darn basic as far as rights go. So now the county doesn't think I have that right. And I don't think they've thought it far through. They didn't think like, oh, he doesn't have that right. They just thought, oh, it won't cause any problems, and it absolutely will cause problems. I cannot. They snapped their fingers and said, do this. And I cannot even respond that fucking fast. I can't just snap, and there I got a mask. I can't do that. I literally can't do that. And they literally, they snapped their fingers, and all of a sudden, it's all over the place. And I'm seeing these signs up everywhere that says you can't come in without a mask. And I'm like, I cannot even respond that quickly. There's literally no stores that you can buy a mask at, as far as I could tell. And even if you could, you can't go in without a mask. So they've really got a catch-22 going here. Ultimately, this is complete nonsense. And I just don't think they understand how absolutely on edge we are. So I was saying that, sometimes we think of things like we are really being oppressed, and sometimes we kind of build it up in our heads. And there is definitely a psychology about believing you're oppressed. I mean, I did a video a long time ago about AOC, how I feel like she is experiencing sympathetic oppression, right? So she is an American. She's actually, I'm going to say this, she's rather attractive. I have a hard time feeling or thinking that she's really been oppressed a day in her life. But she feels it, right? She feels that oppression. And I think she feels it for other people. Bert Kreischer has a great, special out right now on Netflix. And I'm not necessarily recommending that you go get Netflix, but if you do have Netflix, you should definitely watch the most recent Bert Kreischer special, because he knocks it out of the park. And I gotta tell you, that's the problem with Cream, was one of the best punchlines. Anyway, I think AOC is basically Cream, right? That's the problem with Cream. She is constantly being offended for other people. She isn't being, I mean, she's a congresswoman, for crying out loud. And she went down to the border and just threw a fit, at those Border Patrol agents. This is a while back, right? But she just threw a fit because she was feeling like she was oppressed. She was feeling like what they were doing to those people in the cages was being done to her. And I totally appreciate the need to care for other people, but she took it a little bit too far with the performance aspect, is what I'm saying. So anyway, that's kind of important. We got to remember to keep things in perspective, right? And you can't just go. I struggle with this myself, right? You can't just go off the handle about oppression, perceived or real, though it may be. Like, I'm gonna get toilet paper one way or another. Anyway, I am on Parler, by the way. So if Parler and Twitter, check me out at Xverum. That's at EXVERUM. I'm gonna put that on the screen here. I had a note for it, but I didn't do it. Okay, getting back to Republicans and Democrats. So I say that basically the Democrats are like the Decepticons at the moment, and I cannot root for them. I cannot. Don't get me wrong. Autobots aren't perfect. They are a little simplistic. They miss things. They get fooled by the Decepticons quite a bit, right? Like, that's the main problem with Autobots, is they get fooled by Decepticons. But the problem with Decepticons is that they're Decepticons, all right? So I actually came across a thing where Biden thinks that he would use the executive power of the president of the United States to force people to wear masks. Now, get this, Trump has been blocked from reopening the country because the president doesn't have that authority. The president doesn't get to tell people that. But Biden would get to tell people to wear masks because he'd be the president. Think about that for a second. See, the thing is, one of those, somebody's trying to open things up and deliver benefit for society. The other one, somebody's trying to force you to do something. One actually does fall under the purview of the President of the United States, under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, where if the state is trying to violate your rights, the federal government has a role to come in and stopping the state. So, and this was passed actually after the Civil War. The idea was that slavery was a violation of people's civil rights. And so they said, we want to empower the federal government to go into a state and stop violations of individual liberty. And so the main the main individual liberty that they knew about at the time was slavery, and they said, let's pass the 14th Amendment, and let's make it so that if the states ever decide to violate the rights of individuals again en masse, or even in individual situations, the federal government will be empowered to stop it. So we passed the 14th Amendment. Now, I think that one of the real problems that we have is that people have forgotten about a lot of the stuff that happened, the very good things that happened in the late 1800s, legislatively and judicially. People have completely forgotten about that. And a lot of that has to do with the Progressive Revolution, where the progressives and then later the communists took over in law schools and colleges, and they just don't teach it anymore, right? So if you want people to forget what their rights are, the easiest way to do that is just don't teach them ever. Don't ever teach them. So they don't forget, they just never knew. So a lot of people, will have this thing that they'll say, I know my rights. And the truth is, you know a fraction of your rights. You know one or two rights. You know, like the freedom of speech. And then maybe freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and the right to keep and bear arms, and the right to remain silent, and the right not to be searched. But even, that, like, really what right do you have not to be searched if the Supreme Court basically says, there's something like 120 exceptions to that. So now they've basically ruled it away as if it doesn't exist. But you have so many more rights, and these rights are like basic, right? So they come from prior to the Constitution. So we do have some rights that are enshrined in the law, but really the Constitution itself attempted originally to enshrine these rights in Section 4, I believe. It's either Section 4, Article 4, Section 2, or Article 4, Section 4, and it says that the people the citizens shall be entitled to the privileges and immunities of the citizens of the several states, which is to say that these privileges and immunities, privileges are things that you get for being a citizen, right? Like, so it's been a privilege of citizenship to use the roads since Roman times. Like, this is a well-established right that you have. It has been a privilege of citizens to walk around freely in public since long before the Constitution was ever written. And these things were actually so basic that they thought they weren't even really worth writing down. Boy, were they wrong, but they were kind of right about the fact that they were basic, and then they were enshrined in the Constitution in this particular way, right? So they're at least mentioned, and it is said that we are entitled to these things, period, meaning that they cannot be taken away from us. Now, it is in fact possible to take them away through due process and so forth, but you cannot just en masse strip the entire citizenry of all of their rights. It's just not acceptable or legal. So here's the thing, right? Biden tweeted this. I don't know if it was him or if it was one of his aides, right? Because you can't really tell what Biden's doing or saying or thinking. Or if it's somebody else who's doing or saying or thinking it, and he's like, yeah, I like that. The thing you just said. Yeah, sure. So anyway, this is what I wrote earlier. I said, a man like Biden, who believes that he can force you to wear a mask, believes that you are his slave. The government cannot order citizens to obey any damn fool idea that they have. Like, some damn fool idea pops in your head and you think, you know what? I'm going to just order everybody to do this. That is what Biden actually thinks he can do as president of the United States. So, sorry guys, I got to spin the kitty. Yeah, that is my leaf blower. And it is the only thing I can do to get some peace and quiet from the cats, right? So you didn't probably know this, but the cats are like behind me, and they're goofing off, and they're playing around behind the seat. And then if I hit the leaf blower one time, they will fly out of here like they were leaves, and the blower was actually blowing them out. But they just hate the noise. So anyway, Biden thinks that he can just order you to do any damn fool thing. Now, If he thinks he can order you to wear a mask, where does it stop? Seriously, where does it stop? If they think that they can order you in such a way that you have to wear a mask, and they can't order you to do this, but they could order a company that you have to get things from to do that, to make you wear the mask. What about freedom of speech, right? So we've already have a huge problem with all these media companies, but what if Biden gets in and he says, you know what, Facebook, I want you to censor people who have bad opinions. And it's going to start with the white nationalists, because that's who they always go for first. And that is their boogeyman. I have never met a white nationalist. I have never met an actual Nazi, besides maybe the occasional cop. But I mean, I've never met, I'm teasing about a few cops, right? And I'm not saying they're all bad. I'm just saying I've met the bad ones. Anyway, they think, I lost my train of thought. I was making jokes about cops. So any damn fool idea. Twitter. Twitter and Facebook, right? What if they say to Twitter and Facebook, we want you to ban people who say things that we don't like? It's going to start with the Nazis, the white supremacists, the quote-unquote alt-right, like Ben Shapiro, right? You know, the Jewish alt-right person that is absolutely not alt-right, but they said he was. And it's like that. It's like the accusation of alt-right can just be thrown at anybody, because it kind of, on the one hand, is this thing that nobody really knows what it means, so like it's meaningless. It doesn't matter if you say it to somebody. And on the other hand, it's like this thing, that means Nazi. That means fascist, white supremacist. That's what that means. That means a racist, right? So it's like they're trying to put the word racist into another word that you don't really feel like it means racist, but then once it's applied to you and you just kind of like accept it, like if you accept it for more than half a second, all of a sudden it means racist. When they're applying it to you, oh no, it's no big deal. Don't worry about that. We're just saying alt-right. It's not a big deal. And then boom, the next moment it's like, hey, this guy's alt-right. He's been called alt-right forever, and everybody knows he's alt-right. And then you're like, but that means racist. So Ben Shapiro was actually really smart in cutting them off of the pass and saying, not even one time, not even once, I'm not alt-right, and I will not be called alt-right. So that was actually a very smart move on his part. And he demanded that they retract it, which is absolutely the right way to go. Some people had actually accepted that before they really knew, before anybody knew, quite frankly, what they were going to say alt-right meant. And they still get tarred today with this alt-right concept, even though they really aren't alt-right, right? They're not racist. They're not Nazis. They just thought they were an alternative to what the right currently was saying. And that's they took a couple people out like that. So anyway, I want to say this. This is the whole thread behind the name of the channel. A master can give a slave any order he wants to. A master can give a slave any order and expect it to be obeyed. He can tell you to strip. He can tell you to, bind you and whip you. He can do anything. A master can do anything to a slave. Not necessarily appropriately, not rightly. It's not morally correct, but it is legally correct. It is legally acceptable, or legally is lawful, right? If you own a slave, you could do anything to that slave. And this is what happens. Biden thinks that you are his slave because he thinks he can give you any order that he wants to. That's what that means. If he thinks he can give you any order he wants, then you're a slave and not a free citizen. Same thing with the county of Pinellas, right? If they think they can give you any order they want to, then you're not a free person in their view. You're their slave, and they can tell you whatever they want you to do, and you don't have any rights with them. That is what you have to watch out for. If somebody is willing to tell you to wear a mask, that means they don't think you have any rights at all. This is one of the most basic ideas. The idea of personal autonomy, the idea to freely walk around the world with no requirements placed upon you by the state, that is out the window with these people. They think they can literally order you to go left or right or sit down or put a freaking light on your bicycle. It's another thing that pisses me off. Anyway, they okay, let me just stop for a second and give this little aside. The Florida legislature decided to mandate lights on bicycles, but they did it in the dumbest way possible. They actually mandated that when you buy a bike, that you put an aftermarket light on the damn thing. I was actually pulled over a week after I bought a bike to be told that I didn't have the proper lighting. And I had a front light, but I didn't have the back light. So, anyway, they gave me a ticket. I went to court. I won. I won because of a technicality, but I'm pretty sure I would have won regardless because I was prepared on that one. Anyway, and the judge was like, I want to be clear, you won on a technicality. I think he was trying to protect them because they had screwed up. Anyway, it would make much more sense if you're going to order lights on bicycles, order the manufacturers. Order that only bicycles with lights can be sold, and then you will only have bikes with lights on the streets. It's that simple. It's that freaking simple. And in fact, I have a light that I have to recharge every freaking day, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense either. If they had mandated that the manufacturer put the light on the bicycle, like if this was just part of standard equipment for a bike that's to be sold in the state of Florida, then they would have like wheels with generators in them that would power these lights, right? Like it would just be a really simple thing to put a generator in a wheel. It's super easy. It would take almost none of your momentum away because it's a very small charge to run an LED light. It would have been super easy and simple. And you know what? They just didn't do that because they're not that bright. And you see, that's my main problem with legislatures, city councilmen, and executives. You're not that smart. I am definitely smarter than you are. And I don't want you trying to tell me how to live my life because you're not smart enough. You're not even as smart as I am. And quite frankly, I'm not that bright. Like, as far as like how I live my life, it's probably not the best. But these people are dumber than I am. And they're trying to tell me how to live my life. Like, thank you, but you don't even know my situation. The first rule of game theory is that every person makes the moves that are beneficial to them from their perspective, right? So when you are playing a game, let's say we're playing chess, I make the moves that I think are going to work for me from my perspective, and you make the moves that are going to work for you from your perspective. And then the game plays out. But you don't get to tell the other person what moves to make in the game. That is what it is like when the legislature or the city council is trying to tell people how to live their lives. They don't know what things are going to matter. Now, the thing is, people actually really do a great job of figuring out what the best, most efficient route is. 90% of the time, 99% of the time, right? So there are very, very few, and usually they're like moral issues like school integration and things like that. There are very few issues where legislatures or judges getting involved was beneficial. I'll give you one example of a really terrible thing that's currently happening, and that is ethanol and gasoline, right? So ethanol and gasoline is mandated by a lot of states. It's mandated here in Florida, and we have 10% ethanol. Here's the problem. Vehicles are rated based on 100% gas, right? So the CAFE standards that they're using, that the federal government mandates, don't take ethanol into account. They don't go, oh, well, this car can use ethanol, so it's going to be this or that or the other thing, because then, they still have to follow a certain emissions standard, and that emissions standard is generally better if it's full gasoline. So they build vehicles to run on full gasoline. What that actually means is that the compression and the engineering involved does not work with ethanol. So if you put 100% ethanol in an engine that is designed to run on 100% gasoline, it will not work at all. So they're like, all right, here's what we'll do. We'll do 10%. 10% degrades the performance slightly. You probably don't notice this. Your power is about 10% reduced because you don't get any mechanical benefit from the ethanol. You burn the ethanol, and the ethanol produces 33% less emissions. But it also gives you 10% less miles. So here's why it's bad. Nobody drives 90% of the way to their destination and then gets out of the car and walks the rest of the way. Nobody does that. So what they actually end up doing is burning like 111% of the gas they would have burned otherwise. That actually increases their overall emissions by something like 3% or something like that. So there's some number. But basically, you're benefiting in the loss of emissions by only 3%. You're detrimenting the loss of fuel economy and power by 10%. So you're actually, there's 6% of emissions that you're now making that are completely useless. So you're emitting, you're driving the same distance. You're not going to stop driving. You're not going to drive 90% of the way to work and then stop and walk the rest of the way. Nobody does that. So basically, based on human behavior, which is something that the left completely doesn't understand at this point, based on normal human behavior, you've made the situation worse. If emissions are a problem, then you've made the thing that you're trying to solve actually worse by the mandate. And this is the point. People would never choose 90% gasoline. They would never choose 10% ethanol because they instinctively know that doesn't do them any good. So this is the kind of stupidity that can only be mandated on people. And it's been like this for years. They did this thing, they switched it up, and they have been doing this for years now, and it is absolutely not a benefit to anybody or anything, except if you're a corn farmer, then it is kind of beneficial because you get your corn bought. Okay, so do you want Biden to be your master? That's the question we're going to have here in November. Trump clearly doesn't want to master anybody. He doesn't want to be a master. Wants to support individual liberty. I think that one of the problems is I don't know who his advisors are at the moment. Sometimes he gets really great advice, and sometimes he gets terrible advice, and I really don't know which is which. And at the same time, I don't know who is doing what, I should say, is what I don't know. At the same time, I don't think he's a constitutional expert, right? I mean, if you asked him what the Eighth Amendment was, I don't think he could tell you. If you asked him what the 10th Amendment was, I don't think he could tell you. So, that's the kind of thing. Is Trump, perfect and ideal for president? Really, no. I mean, I would rather somebody who knew the Constitution a little bit better be the president of the United States, and somebody who had a very strong dedication to individual liberty through the constitutional means that are available to him. I would like to see that. Trump is better than Biden, in my view. Trump is not trying to enslave people. Biden kind of is. What I've seen in the left at this point is that they basically do not care about any right anymore except for the ones that they've made up. Like, literally, they've made up rights that don't exist in the Constitution and said those are the things that are important. Whereas, like, the idea of actual freedom and liberty and the right to live your life the way you want, they no longer care about that. Freedom of speech, they actually would like to censor you on these platforms. In fact, the people who run the platforms have kind of gone in that direction of liberal censorship or writing rules, generally speaking, that allow liberals to say whatever they want, and then they crack down on conservatives for simply offering the opposing view. It is a famous case that someone was banned off of Twitter for saying men aren't women. I mean, it's that simple. If you believe in the truth of physical reality, you are a candidate for being banned. As a matter of fact, I am probably a candidate for being banned off of YouTube for even pointing that out as an absurd case. But that's the world we live in, and that's what's going on. Hey, I think that's pretty much all I've got for this live stream. I've talked about all the kind of the philosophical issues I wanted to talk about. I hope that this was something that illuminates you, and I'm going to try to talk about constitutional issues and rights and all that kind of stuff, the freedom that we should have as American citizens, and we increasingly don't. They are increasingly taking our liberty away from us, and we need to do something about that. So let me just say this. Everybody says that the polls is the only way to go, and that's not true. Okay, the left has actually demonstrated quite effectively that there is another way to go. And we don't like that on the right. We do not like the idea of destruction as a method for political utility. It is not entirely prohibited. So in other words, if the government gets to the point where they literally do not respect any rights that people have, we're going to get to a point where we have to do something actual and physical about this. That is what we don't want to see. We do not want to basically spark a civil war. That would be the worst case scenario. My real message is to people who are in authority, who are in public office, stop it, you fucking morons. Stop violating people's rights. Stop ignoring people's rights and learn what people's rights actually are. Learn what rights people have. Don't think that you can just give any order that you want to people and that they'll just do it. The cats are back. All right, they're gone. So don't think that you can just give any order and people will obey it. You have to actually understand what it is that you're asking people to do. Understand that if you have a large section of a population saying no to a new idea, you no longer have the consent of the governed. Do you know what it is when you do something without consent? I mean, what we call that, generally speaking? Yeah, don't do that. Don't freaking do that. That's the thing you shouldn't be doing. If you don't have the consent of the population, stop. Fucking stop. Is that hard? Is it that hard to understand? So listen. Don't try to be dictators because that's not going to work out very well for you in a nation where, like, literally there are more guns than people. It's not a good idea to try to be a dictator. It's not going to work. I mean, they've been saying this about Trump for like 4 years, right? And he's been resisting every, thing that you've been saying, like, oh, he's going to be a dictator. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. He's going to, and now they're saying he's not going to accept the results of the election. They said that about him last time. He said, he's not going to accept that he lost. Well, he didn't lose. You know who didn't accept that she lost? Hillary, obviously, right? So she didn't accept that she lost. Anyway, yeah, I don't think Trump's going to lose. I really think that he's Biden is such a terrible candidate. He's not even a candidate. He is literally a warm body that looks like a candidate but can't speak or tell you what he's going to do or how he's going to govern. Like, he's not even really a full candidate. And he thinks he's going to win. People think he's going to win. I have talked to people who have a couple months ago, they were like, oh, Biden's terrible. He's never going to win. No, we don't want Biden. To all of a sudden now, like, people are like, oh, yeah, Biden's definitely going to win. He's definitely our guy. He's going to win. We know he's going to win. And I'm like, how can you convince yourself of this? Like, I understand the polls are polls, right? So polls are saying Biden's going to win right now. The polls have him up. They don't have him over 50%. That's part of the problem, right? Because, see, here's the thing. I've been involved in politics for quite a while, and I've been involved with actual parties and official campaigns, and they have internal polls. And the internal polls are always better than the external polls. The polls that the press does are shit. They're terrible. They're crap. The polls that the internals, as they call them, they just literally call them the internals, are always better, are always more accurate. And I guarantee you, the internals are not showing what the externals are showing. There is no way that this is the case. And they're basically, this has actually been true of the last, like, as long as I've been alive, as long as I've been paying attention, which admittedly I wasn't paying attention when Reagan was running, right? So I don't know what the polls were saying then. But every other time, it's the Democrat's going to win, the Democrat's going to win, the Democrat's going to win, the Democrat's going to win. And now sometimes the Democrat actually does win, but that doesn't mean the polls are right. The polls are literally always saying the Democrat is going to win, and sometimes the Democrat does win. But that means the polls are really, really wrong. There's a real problem with the way we do polls, And it's not just like a one-term problem. Like, this problem has existed for as long as I have been in politics, as long as I've been alive, as long as I've been watching this, right? The polls are wrong, and they will continue to be wrong. And what that means is that I ignore them, right? Like, I'm not saying that I have a better poll in this particular case. I'm just saying I know that poll is not correct, and I'm not really worried about it. But the other thing that you have to realize with those polls is that occasionally you will see the Democrat get above 50%. And it seems that the quote-unquote undecideds tend to break towards the right. And the reason for that is what a lot of people have talked about with this idea that you don't want to tell the pollster that you're a conservative. You don't want to, like, nobody really wants to admit to being a Trump supporter, right? Because Trump's kind of looks bad every once in a while, and you just don't want to be associated with that. And I get that. Now, I would argue the other point. I would argue that Jesus told a parable, right? A father has two sons, and says, "Hey, tomorrow I want you to go and help out in the harvest." And one of them says, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go do something else. I got plans. Sorry, Dad." And the other one says, "Yeah, I'll go help. And the one that says he'll go help goes around, he takes a basket out, dances around, puts a couple pieces of fruit in it, and then goes away. And then the one who says he's not going to help ends up going out and helping in the fields and helps all day long with the harvest. So which one of those two sons pleased the father? And the answer is the one that actually did the work, not the one that gave him the lip service. So whereas I definitely don't like a lot of things Trump says, what he's done has usually been much more... Do I look like I have an earring? Anyway, all right. What he's done actually looks a lot more beneficial. It looks good. It looks like it's like what I wanted him to do. Like, I'll give you an example. He came out at one point and said, "We'll take their guns now and give them due process later." Well, if you take the guns before due process, then it's not due process, right? I mean, you can't just go confiscate something and call it due process. In fact, that is a violation of due process. You have to do the process before you can confiscate the thing, right? So that's not due process. So he basically said this ridiculously ridiculous thing, and I was actually pretty mad at him for a second, and then he didn't do it, right? They didn't put that in to any legislation or plans that they have. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Okay, I'm back. I'm calm again. I'm back and away from that. So yeah, things Trump has said has actually made me mad. I have gotten mad at things Trump has said, and then he hasn't done them. And I go, all right, somebody probably like sat him down, explained what due process is and how you can't do that. So okay, fine, no problem. But at the same time, still not like great, not the best. I mean, I would rather both, right? I would rather both. Yes, Dad, I'll go help in the field, and then he does. At the same time, you rarely get that with people. People just aren't that way. So you have to watch the actions rather than the words. Okay, well, I guess I'm done. It is 1 a.m. I might go work out. We'll see what happens. Yeah, think about that story for just a second, and then think about now that I'm saying I might go work out at 1 a.m. All right, you guys have a great night, and hey, talk to you later, and I'm going to try to do this more often. And 5 seconds.